What's up, guys? It's Stan Mitchell, and it's time for part 2 of my time in the Corps. I assume if you're watching part 2, you halfway enjoyed part 1, or you're like a cousin of mine or something. So hopefully part 1 was decent. I think part 2 is pretty good. You'll probably see me looking off to the side a tad, and that's because one of the things I've learned, um, I cannot tell a joke to save my life. So you could tell me the funniest joke ever, and like 30 seconds later, if I went to, tell someone the joke, I would screw it up somehow. I would get the middle at the end or something, or I don't know. I'm not good at that, and so I've written the second part of my story, and I've got it in a pretty good order. And I know if I don't look at some notes, I will get it out of order, and this video will be a total waste of time, even for my cousin. So with that, let's go. I'm calling the second part the phone call that turned me into a man. And it's really one of the second most memorable parts of my life, and it happened just a few hours after part 1. If you haven't watched part 1, you probably need to, since I won't be totally filling you in, but if you haven't and you don't want to, it's a long video, I know. I think you can get by with what I'll say. So a couple of hours after I met this guy, who I'm calling Smith, I get something to eat, and I'm going to go call my parents. And I had told them before I checked in that I would call them after I checked in with my unit. So they were expecting a call. And to set this up with the mindset, I had gone into checking into my new unit, which was 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, thinking that finally I would really enjoy the Marine Corps, that things would be better. Like everyone, I knew boot camp was going to suck. I enjoyed parts of it, but, you're getting yelled at. It's pretty miserable most of the time. So I left that thinking, School of Infantry, which is 8 weeks long, would be more enjoyable. And that's what I told my friends, my family, etc. So I go to School of Infantry, and it's actually even tougher than boot camp, which totally surprised me. All you ever hear about is boot camp. I had no idea that School of Infantry would be more difficult, and it was by a long shot. And you also get treated like crap, pretty much. You're still a new guy. You're still a boot, as the Marine Corps calls them, which is like a newbie. It's like lower than dirt. But I survived the 8 weeks of School of Infantry, so I had told my parents and everyone else that thought, finally going to my unit, it's going to be great. And that's how I left home. I was all proud to be dressed up in my Service A uniform, which is called Alphas, as you may recall from part 1. So I'm in my Alphas. I drive down. I've got a brand new truck. All new Marines, it seems like, get brand new vehicles. You have all this money saved up from boot camp, because you can't spend any money for 3 months, and you're earning what is at least decent or a little bit better than decent pay, because your food is provided, your housing's provided, so you come out of it with at least a good down payment toward a new vehicle. And you're a new adult, you're 18, and you've got a guaranteed job, and suddenly you think, I want a new vehicle. So like every other honestly foolish idiot Marine, I go out and buy a brand new 96 S10, which I remember perfectly, and it's a 4-wheel drive and red and gray. And so I had driven down to North Carolina just so proud. I thought I was on cloud 9. I had my 5 pounds of new muscle. I was a Marine, and I had a new truck. So in my mind, I thought, who wouldn't want to marry me? I'm like Tom Cruise in Top Gun or something. I get down there, you know what happens. I'm in my Alphas, we get yelled at. I meet this guy named Smith, who's going to come back and probably bash my head in. So I've eaten dinner, and I'm calling my parents to check in. I should also note that I knew going into it that I would finally get my own room with just 3 guys and a shared bathroom and shower. Up to that point in boot camp and School of Infantry, you have these big open squad bays with like bunk beds. There's like 60 or 80 dudes in there, and you're sharing just a few toilets and a few showers. There's no privacy. There's no TVs. There's none of that. You live out of a footlocker basically in a sea bag. So that was one of the things I was looking forward to as well. You get your new unit, you can get cable, you can get a little TV, whatever. you know what happened when I met Smith. So I'm trudging to the phone, and I call my dad. Let me make sure I'm staying on track here. Anyway, so he's in a good mood at first, and thankfully my mom's not on the phone. It's just me and my dad, and he notices really quickly that like something, my mood is bad and something has gone on, and I tell him, I'm like, Dad, I'm pretty sure when this guy Smith and his buddies get back tonight from drinking, they're they're probably gonna jump me and beat the crap out of me because I'm not gonna back down. And what should I do? I don't know what to do. And I can't imagine thinking back now that I'm a little older. I'm 39, and he was probably early 40s or so. And I can't imagine like having your son call you from 800 miles away or 600, ever what it is, and telling you, yeah, Dad, here in a few hours, I'm going to get beat up and possibly, beat up by this guy who's hospitalized some other dude. So I can't imagine hearing that and how helpless he must have been. And I hate that I ever shared that, but I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I told you I can't tell jokes. So here we go. So he hears that, and he says he'd be praying for me and that I should do the best I could do. And he says, I really don't know what to tell you to do, or he didn't know anything about the Marine Corps, and it wasn't like I could have gone to some senior Marine and been like, hey, I'm going to get beat up. I mean, that's not what you do. So I tell him, I'll figure it out or whatever, and I say, I'll call you tomorrow to tell you how it went, because obviously I'm expecting to get beat up pretty bad, and I'm assuming he probably thinks I'm going to as well. And he paused a minute before that, or after I said that, and he said, now, son, your mom and I weren't in favor of you joining, which of course I knew, and they had wanted me to go to college, and I had insisted after my junior year to join in the delayed entry program, which is something you can sign up like a year early at the age of 17, and you can meet with a recruiter once a month, kind of get a little bit of heads up on what it's going to be like. And I thought that'd be so important, so I had to just hammer them to allow me to do that, and they have to sign the paperwork. So they had done that. So I had convinced them to do something they didn't want to do in the first place. Anyway, so my dad had continued, I know it's tough and I know it's scary, but you can't keep calling home every night upsetting me and your mom. There's literally nothing we can do, and it hurts us to hear these stories. And as I said earlier, my mom wasn't on the phone, and that's probably a good thing, because it would have been a terrible thing for her to hear about this guy named Smith. And she might have prevented my dad saying what he said next, which was huge, life-changing, a big deal for me. And that was, he paused for a second, and he said, you need to not call us for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. We love you, but you're going to have to work this out yourself. And I remember when he said that, I was shocked. Honestly, I was angry, and I felt betrayed. Felt like I'd been cut off and kicked in the face, and I couldn't believe he said it. But I usually hold things in. All my friends will tell you. I rarely tell you how I truly feel. I just kind of swallow it down. And so I didn't really react, and I basically just signed off and said, I don't know what I said, but I know I didn't tell him I was upset. And so we sign off, and it took a long time, but in the weeks and months that followed, I realized that he was absolutely right. They didn't want me to join the Marine Corps, but they had supported me, and you can't ask more from parents than that. And I also had heard that me joining was causing some health problems for my mom. She'd been dealing with some seizures, and none of my family knew what I would be going through, because we aren't from a family that has served. No one in my family had ever served in the military except for my uncle, who spent some time in the Navy. So no one knew what to expect, and I think the not knowing is probably what made it so hard for them. And then probably, given that I'd called to tell them about Smith, I was probably sharing too much, which was adding additional stress and making them freak out. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't get off track here. Let me say that I need to add that I have discussed this phone call with my dad in recent years, and he doesn't remember it. So I don't know if it was like some guiding force from above that had him say this. I don't know if maybe, because I mean, I needed to hear this. I don't know if he said something way less than that. Maybe he didn't even say that. Maybe he said he was busy for a week and I interpreted it wrong. But in my mind, at least, I don't think I'm making it up because I just remember how mad I was. I remember when I hung up. I remember exactly where I was in the phone booth. I don't remember very many phone calls while I was in the Marine Corps. I remember that one. I remember one I made in Korea, and I remember one I made in Okinawa, and maybe one in France. But of all the places I made phone calls, I don't remember any of them. I don't remember what I said. But I remember this one, and I was so angry that the plastic phone, I can't remember what they're called, the handle thing. I wanted to just like bash it into 1,000 pieces. I remember walking my room, mad. I remember telling a few new Marine boots that I was friends with in the days that followed that my dad had said that, and they were all a little jarred or shocked as well. But um, it didn't take long. It took maybe a couple of weeks, and as time went on from then, every week and month that passed after those 2 weeks or so, I realized that what he told me was absolutely the perfect thing. It was kind of like this circle of life thing. It's like the mama bird pushing out the baby bird. It's like it was time for me to grow up. And I can't imagine what a wimp I'd have been. I mean, a pathetic wimp if he'd been like, yeah, call me tomorrow night, tell me how it goes. And then every night I have just called home constantly, seeking their advice, whining about how I'm being treated. Um, Instead, he gave me some tough love, and to me, that single brutal phone call like culminated a nearly perfect upbringing, and it helped make me a man. And so whatever toughness I possess, I certainly got from him and some of that tough love. So that's the story. Let me give you some quick lessons learned. The one thing, the first one is, life is like so hard and cruel. But you need to remember, especially if you're like my age and you have kids, that you're impacting your kids for sure, but also those around you every day, whether you realize it or not. In my dad's case, when I was a young boy, he fell. He had a job accident, and he fell 38 feet and landed right on his head, crushed 3 vertebrae, and of course he was lucky to even survive that. But he was told that he would be confined to a wheelchair the rest of his life. And he refused to accept that diagnosis. He's a hellion, I guess, for lack of a better word. So year after year, he kept doing everything he could to not be stuck in a wheelchair. And eventually, I don't remember the exercises or any of that stuff because I was too young. But he was eventually, I do remember he was using a walker before long, like a big 4-legged walker that you'll see elderly people using. And it wasn't long before that he was using a cane, one of those 4-legged canes, not like a single leg one, but one of those that you'll see like a really frail elderly person use. He was using one of those, and he had to wear this massive plastic back brace, and he also had to wear a plastic, long plastic. I'm talking like a 1.5 foot long or so thing on his right leg, which was partially paralyzed. But he was eventually using a cane, and he eventually was without a cane. And all during this time, everyone was telling him, friends and family, you should sue that company. They didn't give you a safety belt. It's their fault you fell. You could win a couple million or whatever. And he didn't want to. He wanted to go back to work. Even when I was a kid, I remember thinking, I can't believe he's not going to sue them. Like, why would they hire him back? He's not going to be able to work. He's been bedridden. He can barely get around. But he ended up being right. They did bring him back. They gave him a job at like a weigh station at first, and then eventually he was driving heavy equipment again. And during all those years, and when this is like 4 or 6 years, this is a long time. My dad like never gave a rah-rah speech. You should never give up. Any of that. He never said any of that. He rarely says much of anything. He just does. And the whole time, I'm a little kid watching him, and my sister is too, and we just see this strong rock, this guy that just, I don't know, life had thrown this terrible thing at him, and he wouldn't break. Um, and also, and this is crazy. I can't remember in that ever as a kid him ever complaining about back pain. And I would remember stories of, my mom would say a lot of times she would tell me or my sister she would wake up in the middle of the night or roll over and she would see he was awake, that he would be in so much pain he couldn't sleep, but he was always afraid of drugs that you could get hooked on. And she would ask him if he's in pain, and he would always lie and say, "No, I just can't sleep." Um, so my point in relaying this really long story is that you impact those around you, and if you're a parent, you are impacting those kids, whether you think you are or not, and you're probably doing it a lot more than you think. It isn't just the speeches you give; it's your actions. And you guys know this. It isn't like it's rocket science. Um, few other quick little things. It did work out. Not only get the job, he's had 4 different like mega corporations buy out the company. There were no promises that they would keep him. There have been people laid off, gotten rid of, but my dad's a workaholic. He works circles around everyone, and he's never lost his job. So his idea not to sue the company was probably the best thing he ever did. He loves to work. He's a workaholic, and he always says if you don't enjoy your job, try not working for about a year and being in bed. Um, couple other things. Let me make sure I'm not getting off track. So, just as my dad didn't complain, I think it's important that if you're a parent, that you're not complaining around your kids. Your complaining can kill their dreams because they do see and hear everything, and and they believe it. I mean, you're their parent, you're their adult, you're the biggest influence on their life. So if my dad had been complaining about how cruel life was, or everyone gets hurt, or you're gonna lose jobs, he could have been so negative, and it would have impacted my sister and I in ways that I probably can't even imagine. Um, one second other lesson is to make sure you support your kids' dreams, no matter how outlandish they seem. When I was a kid at 8 or 9, maybe 10, my mom and I can't remember the age, but I started writing longhand stories. I, for whatever reason, thought I could write novels, and I mean that's a crazy dream to have at that age. And my parents, neither of them went to college, and I think some parents might have been a little skeptical, or might have said, "Yeah, that's fun, son, but you're gonna have to get a real job someday," and they never did. So if your kid has some hobby or some dream, definitely, I know I'm stating the obvious, but don't shoot it down. Um, make sure I'm not missing anything here. Oh, as I said in chapter 1, yeah, I'm not gonna go there. Let's see. So that phone call, though, I was pretty tough before boot camp because of the bullies, which I did say in chapter 1, um, because of me studying martial arts, and then my dad's example, and then there was that phone call. That was the final thing that sealed it for me, that helped me become who I am. That phone call helped me remember that, my dad's a total badass, so why aren't I? Um, I think the other lesson is with your kids. Um, if your kid gets in trouble at school or with the police, I think they need to pay the price. Maybe the first time you try to help them or get them out, but I think the second time they got to pay the price. And I think that's what I learned is I wanted to join the Marines. I didn't listen to my parents, and so I had gotten in over my head. But at some point, I'm 18. You've got to learn that you want something to happen. You wanted this to take place, and now you've got to pay the price. Um, and I should say that in my case, my silliness, stupidity, determination, whatever word you want to use, was so crazy that uh, I wanted to be guaranteed infantry in the Marine Corps. And when I met with a Marine recruiter a couple of times, I had scored really high on the ASVAB. So he kept saying, why don't you do intelligence? Which I guess you have to have a 70 or above on your score to do. And I didn't want to do intelligence. I wanted to do infantry. So this guy says, well, we don't have any infantry slots. And I guess he's calling a bluff or whatever. And I'm so determined and thick-headed and whatnot that I said, oh, okay, well, I want guaranteed infantry. So I started meeting with the Army, met with them a couple of times, And then after about 2 weeks later, the recruiter, I don't know if he heard about me meeting with the Army, or he miraculously found a guaranteed infantry slot. So I think it took a while, but I had to realize that I had gotten my wish. I wanted guaranteed infantry. I didn't know what it'd be like, but I got what I wanted, and now I'd have to deal with a guy named Smith. Um, One other thing about the phone call, a lot of parents did not react the way my dad did. There, maybe not a lot, but there were a few. There were a few that would get similar phone calls, and then they would try to rescue their kids. And so they'd hear these cruel stories, almost all of which were true. And so they would call their congressman, and say, my son is being hazed, or he's being mistreated. And sometimes you would hear about these congressmen sending aides, or some of these guys actually even got out because of that. A very small percentage, but those who didn't, and most of them didn't, they were mocked and harassed and made fun of like you would not believe. So the worst thing he could have done was try to intervene, like calling the base and saying, my son could be beat up in a few hours. And the second worst thing he could have done was to try to get me out of my contract, because not only would it not have worked, but I would have had no success in those 4 years. I would have never even probably made team leader. So every day you're impacting your kids. Set the example. Don't have to give speeches. And then one other thing is about the complaining. Don't whine about things like the TV, too much TV, or evils of the internet, or whatever political party you despise. Instead, be a part of their life. Go throw a ball with them, or if they draw, go be involved in their hobby. My dad would come home after working a long day, and even before taking his boots off or eating, he'd go throw a ball with me. Or I don't know about you, but when I had a regular job and I worked a long day, I mean, when I got home, the first thing I thought of was getting out of my clothes and eating. But we didn't have time because he worked late and it'd be getting dark soon, so he'd just immediately go out and go throw a ball with me. And that's a lesson that taught me if I wanted to be great at something, I had to practice and work hard. Um, and so I think, obviously, with your kids, I know it's so hard when you're working your tail off and you got all this stress, and the last thing you want to hear about your kids' homework project they're scared about, or this thing that they're interested in drawing or painting. But just a few times helping them out on that will literally help change their life. In our case, my sister and I were very lucky in that, because they cared about our schooling, even though they didn't have college degrees, and we got a small allowance, or if our report cards were good, we got a little bit of money. That led both of us to get scholarships, and we both completed college. And she's a lot smarter than me. She became a CPA, and it's just that little extra effort that they did. If you don't do that with your kids, you're affecting them for the next 60 or 70 years. It's not just like you're affecting them through their childhood. You're planting seeds that last forever. And then the final thing is, for the guys who are serving, or even if you're a young kid in college, like, be careful with how much you're sharing. That was the thing I learned from that. So from that point on, I rarely shared anything. So if you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, don't tell them that things are bad, or guys, you're in a lot of contact, or IEDs. Tell them you're in a quiet zone. I mean, there's nothing they can do about it anyway. So why stress them out? Why add that burden? Just say, it's hot out here, and that kind of sucks, and it takes a while to get mail, or make something up like that. Really small stuff, but don't throw all that stuff back home on the home front. And the same thing in the civilian world. Even if you're an adult, you go visit a bedridden grandparent, and even if you're facing bankruptcy or some terrible thing, don't share that. They have their own problems. Go cheer them up. Take photos. Tell them about your kid's recital, or their first baseball game, or making their first tackle. Don't go there and drop all this crap on them. Life is hard enough without sharing all this terrible stuff. So that was a final important lesson I learned. So obviously you don't want to take it too far. You don't want to not share anything, but everything in moderation. Don't share too much. So that's it. Lessons: show your kids a ton of support. Don't be afraid to show them a little tough love. and just be strong for them. I think that's it, guys. Appreciate you listening.